Nice to be here after a weekend of blissful pleasure. And Rob Sampson joins us now, state senator from Wolcott, for Blissful Politics. Hey, Rob.
Blissful Politics. Good afternoon, Todd.
There's a lot of that going around, isn't there?
I don't know how blissful any of it is, but there's a lot of politics.
Yeah, a lot of politics going around. Okay, we'll drop the blissful. So what's on your mind? What is pulling at your heartstrings in terms of the politics these days?
Well, I've been enjoying your conversation about the global events and Israel and Hamas and the terrible tragedy over there. And certainly don't want to change the subject much because I'd love to talk to you about those things too. But for me, the number one issue facing Connecticut is what's going on in Bridgeport. And I don't want your listeners to lose sight of this because I think it's super important that we pay close attention to what happens in this court case that's going on regarding the election irregularities, let's use that term, that happened in the Bridgeport Democrat primary.
Yeah, the ballot stuffing controversy going on down there, which is it's a continuation of a theme. It's not a sudden surprise event. It's a regular problem. And I find it very gratifying, Rob, because it's Democrats fighting with Democrats and suing Democrats. And it's good to, in the larger scheme of how the nation is told that there's no such thing as fraudulent election activities, and you don't have to worry. Nobody cheats in our elections, and there's no malfeasance that's measurable. And there you have right there in Bridgeport proof that that's not true.
Exactly. It's very important to me also because I've been saying these things have been going on for many, many years now and citing whatever evidence I could come up with. And it's not to say that there's never been any evidence before. We've convicted a dozen or so people in the state of Connecticut for similar type of absentee ballot fraud. But this is the most vivid and most obvious situation that we've had, I think, to this point. And every day it unfolds with more critical information. So they had some witnesses in court this past week who acknowledged that, number one, they don't do any sort of, security verification about the person who produced the absentee ballot. Other states that do absentee ballots, at least absentee ballots in any kind of numbers, they have a signature verification process. They have a system by which when you sign up to register to vote, they put your signature on file, they save it in digital form, and then when your ballot comes back, they scan that signature. And they have some kind of system that says, it's 90% match or it's 70% match, and they can set a threshold to say... So they have an
automated system, you mean, and a bell goes off if it doesn't look like it's the right signature.
Right, and it just goes to the next step. So some individual will actually look at it in person to verify whether or not it's legitimate or not. And they have a process. Connecticut, we don't have a process. We don't have any signature verification, and that was confirmed. Something I have said over and over again that's been denied by my Democratic counterparts. It's not a problem, Senator Sampson, you're just exaggerating. Well, here it is. We have testimony in court suggesting that there is almost no verification of any data, where it comes from, whether or not the person was legitimately absent from voting, whether or not the outer envelope had the proper stamp from the post office or a seal from the town clerk's office. I mean, how could you even be processing ballots without knowing where they came from? And yet, here's evidence that that's indeed happening.
It's an amazing thing because government knows well that its citizens don't need a lot of cajoling to follow the law. If you think about tickets for some kind of malfeasance on the roads, like parking illegally or going way over the speed limit. In the old days, back when we used to have patrols for things like speeding, the way they would control the population is by, 1 out of every 10,000 people who were speeding maybe would get a ticket. And word would spread, and you see the flashing lights, and people would conform to the law under the suspicion that they could get busted if they were to violate the law. But if you don't have that, then everybody gets the message loud and clear. You can do whatever you want.
Right. There's very little threat of prosecution, and that is the danger of expanding mail-in voting because you don't really know the source of it and you may never be able to find out, but you're not even going to find out until long after the crime has actually been committed. One of the most amazing things that came out of this court case is some quotes from the defense attorney. And I'm going to read this from you. It's in the Washington Post. It's an AP article, but he says it's 24 different drops that are on exhibit. It involves, I believe, only 9 people. So this quote unquote great conspiracy that we've all been hearing about isn't there. I'm like thinking to myself, last week was only 1 person. Now we're talking about 9 people, 24 different drops. There was an election in Southington last year. My good friend Toni Morrison was defeated by 1 vote. People cannot have confidence in our elections if you're going to dismiss 24 absentee ballot drops and 9 individuals involved is, an acceptable amount of fraud.
Yes, but it's good to know that they have no fallback argument. Like if there's no problem here, just keep moving along, doesn't work, then they don't know what to say.
Right. And the most amazing thing about this to me, Todd, is that, there's a big division within the Democrats on this exact subject. And I just couldn't believe it when my colleagues in the Senate and in the House in Hartford, my Democratic colleagues who represent the city of Bridgeport, who have been involved in the same similar situation, particularly Senator Marilyn Moore, who may have been the victim of the exact same type of absentee ballot irregularities. I'm saying that because nothing's been proven at this point. But she voted against my amendments the same as everybody else. It's so bizarre that they will stick together through thick or thin when it comes to the legislation, the policy that makes all this possible, even when back home their voters are obviously being disenfranchised. They went so far as to claim that I was trying to disenfranchise people by requiring identification. Well, here they are defending the behavior that's existed, which clearly disenfranchises voters.
But I found that narrative to be particularly outrageous. The idea that the Speaker of the House would suggest that to implement law to control the issuing of ballots and the acceptance of ballots as official votes, that somehow would disenfranchise, when what you're trying to do when you control the ballots and make sure all voters are legitimate is you're trying to make sure the elections are sound, i.e. that people aren't being disenfranchised.
It's inexplicable. I mean, Todd, I went on for an hour and a half or so in the Senate during the debate, during the special session. I offered 5 very clear, very concise amendments about doing away with drop boxes, monitoring drop boxes, creating a criminal penalty for this type of activity. I mean, who can argue with these things? Requiring an actual identification process to go into our absentee ballot mail-in voting scheme. And yet they voted them down all on party lines. And then during the wrap-up, it was a race issue. And I'm standing there dumbfounded. I'm like, aren't we talking about a white mayor of Bridgeport with a Hispanic challenger and a city filled primarily with a lot of minority voters who are being disenfranchised no matter who they voted for? And yet I'm the bad guy because I want to make sure we have a legitimate election. And they're painting the picture that it's Republicans interested in voter suppression. I mean, how can anyone even go on believing this? I'm hoping that people in Bridgeport wake up and realize that their representatives, and that seems to be all of them, are completely uninterested in doing what's right and making sure that we have fair and honest elections.
Wolcott Senator Rob Sampson is with us, and we're talking about the charges of fraud, the evidence of fraud in the mayoral election in Bridgeport. The thing you just described, Rob, the fact that higher up Democrats, the people who run the state basically, are poo-pooing the idea that there's anything problematic with the elections, and they're making lame excuses, which is frustrating, but at the same time it's confirmation of the level of disdain they hold voters in. And they think because they have total control that they can do whatever they want. They don't think, oh, we've got total control. We have a duty to make sure we're behaving in a way that is ethical, that doesn't violate any appearances of respect for rule of law. No, they don't care about any of that. They just lie.
Yeah, that's about the size of it. And, I should expect more, but this is what I'm used to. Many issues come down to, distractions and conversations about race and other things that are not really relevant to the policy debate that we're having. And it's typical. I mean, the progressive movement is an authoritarian movement. They're completely and utterly invested in control. That's what that party is all about. They want to have maximum control of the citizens, the maximum control of how our day-to-day lives are lived, determining, what type of cars we drive or whether we're allowed to have a gas stove or whether we are being forced to shut our business down because of a pandemic and so on. They're all about control. So it doesn't surprise me that they would resort to ignoring all facts, all evidence, and all legitimate efforts to make good, honest public policy in an effort to achieve it. I always tell people, when describing the difference between Republicans and Democrats, it's the Democrats who want to tell you how to live. And this is a perfect example of that.
What would be another one?
Another example of the difference between Republicans and Democrats?
Well, of how they want to tell us how to live. Does anything else pop into your head?
It's almost everything. They want to determine what benefits employers must offer their employees. They want to determine, what criteria is necessary to provide housing. They want to determine whether or not housing. I heard your conversation earlier. On WTIC. I don't know if it was with you. I think it might have been with Tom. But they were talking about, housing availability in the state of Connecticut. I don't think it's the job of government to come up with a plan for affordable housing. The government should be there trying to promote free markets and commerce. I can tell you from being a landlord myself that if I knew that there was money to be had by providing more housing in Connecticut, I would be finding ways to provide it. The reason why we have a housing shortage in this state is simply because the government is hostile to people that provide housing. There is no other reason other than that.
Well, by its very essence, the more government is trying to manage something that falls under a supply and demand domain, the more it's going to drift away from those hard needs of the marketplace. If supply is doctored by decisions that politicians are making, we're in deep trouble. And that's probably what's causing them to enter in, is that they've created a problem through public policy, like they do with every public policy. And now they want to come in and, quote unquote, fix it, which has to do with them making new rules that detach it further from the market. Rob Sampson is here. We'll take a quick break and talk more with Rob on WTIC.
Now, back
is here, WTIC, State Senator from Wolcott. Appreciate you taking the time, Rob. Wait a sec. I guess I didn't push the button. Now you can talk. Sorry about that.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for offering me some time.
So what else should people know about in terms of what's going on in state government? Because this is a quiet time for state government news.
Right. Well, during the break, I was just contemplating our conversation and thinking about different areas where the Democrats, the progressive Democrats that run the state of Connecticut, where they're interfering in different types of industries. And I every time I thought of a new industry, I could think very easily of a way they're interfering. And it's everywhere, Todd. It's everything across the board. I mean, think of the insurance industry in the state of Connecticut. A dozen years ago, there were maybe 10 or 15 companies selling health insurance in the state of Connecticut. They offered a variety of different products at different prices. It was a lot cheaper back then, and the coverage was better. Today, we have two companies offering coverage in the state of Connecticut, and the state of Connecticut effectively tells them what coverages to offer and more or less what price to offer it at. Think about, interference in savings. These days, the state of Connecticut is competing with ability, even saving money, by requiring employers to take money out of people's paychecks unless they opt out, of course. It should be an opt-in program, if anything, and it shouldn't exist, in my opinion. But, there are already 1,000 mechanisms that allow people to put money away for savings. Short-term disability insurance. I mean, they came up with paid sick leave. This is basically to displace that entire industry. It's everything. I mean, the cost of our groceries, the failure to be able to buy certain products is because the federal government is paying, food producers not to produce food. It's incredible, Todd, when you start to think of the scope of how government interferes in the marketplace and with our freedom to be able to purchase goods and at competitive prices.
Yeah, I was thinking about it this weekend because it's so expensive now to go out to eat, and when you think about the minimum wage that you have to pay a server who goes home with often tons of money in their pockets from tips, and still they're paying those high new minimum wages to people who might not be particularly experienced to do things like bus tables.
Right. Well, so far they don't have that law in Connecticut. We have a minimum wage, but it does not apply to wait staff, although they're trying desperately to do it. It comes back every year, and we've been able to defeat it each year.
Oh, so you've held off the getting rid of the separate minimum wage for tipped workers.
Yes, the tip wage still exists in Connecticut, and that's because tipped workers, once they start realizing what's going to happen, that restaurants are going to just start raising the prices, or they're going to start including the service fee, and these folks are going to end up losing on that calculation at the end of the day, minimum wage versus the tip wage plus their tips. They've been helpful in pushing it back.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah, the problem is that the people that we need to get to on a day-to-day basis to actually show up at the Capitol, either by Zoom or in person, and tell people they don't want these terrible ideas, they're outnumbered by the ones that are our career
that are paid to be there.
Exactly.
All right, Rob, we got 30 seconds. What else do you want us to know?
Nothing more than I'm going to continue to try and stem the tide as much as possible, and continue working for freedom and restoring American principles every way across the board. And the number one way we have to do that right now is to expose the Democrats, their terrible policies. This election issue in Bridgeport is big, and if we're going to want to see change in Connecticut, it's super important that people are aware of it so that they can start creating public pressure to make change.
Rob Sampson, good to talk with you. Thanks for taking the time.
Always my pleasure, Todd. Thanks so much.
Let's do